For 3 years, she built a case in the shadows. Tonight, she handed him the final piece of evidence herself from the trunk of his own car. This was never a kidnapping, it was an audit, and he had just become the most cooperative witness in her investigation. Special Agent Mara Vance was the architect of her own capture. Her target, Michael the Ghost Valenti, a mafia boss so insulated by layers of loyalists that traditional surveillance had failed for a decade. The Bureau's case was built on whispers, not witnesses. To get a confession, they needed to get inside his head. To get inside his head, Mara had to let him think he had won. But when you invite a monster into your trap, you have to be certain you're the one holding the door shut. Michael Valenti earned his nickname, the Ghost, by operating in a void. For 10 years, the FBI's organized crime task force had mapped his empire: illegal gambling, union racketeering, a suspected pipeline for smuggling, but the map was drawn in whispers. He never gave orders on a wiretap. He never touched money directly. His soldiers were loyal to the point of fanaticism, bound by old-world omerta and the very modern understanding that Valenti's lawyers could bury any charge short of murder. And even murder was always committed by someone who conveniently vanished or refused to speak. The case was a beautiful, empty sculpture, all form, no proof. This was the wall Special Agent Mara Vance was assigned to 3 years ago. At 32, she was a specialist in financial forensics, a numbers person who could trace a single dollar through 12 shell companies. Her mandate was simple: follow the money until it led to a provable conspiracy. For 1,000 days, she did. She traced hidden payments from a Brooklyn sanitation company to an offshore account in Cyprus. She linked a series of suspicious luxury condominium purchases to Valenti's known associates. She built a ledger of guilt that was 5 inches thick, and it was all useless in a courtroom. Every path led to a lieutenant, a frontman, a faceless corporation, never to the man at the center. The ghost remained just that. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday in October. Surveillance lost a key lieutenant, a man named Santoro, for 48 hours. When he reappeared, he was boarding a flight to Sicily. The team knew it was a defection, a rat fleeing a sinking ship. He was their one chance at a cooperating witness who had sat in the room with Valenti. They had agents in Palermo ready to greet him. Santoro never left the airport. He was found in a rental car in long-term parking, a single bullet behind his ear, a luggage tag from a flight he never took placed neatly on his chest. The message was not just for the FBI, it was for anyone who might ever consider talking. Valenti's reach was absolute, his intelligence impeccable. Someone was tipping him off. That was when Mara's analysis took a dark turn. She cross-referenced the timing of every failed operation, every vanished witness, every compromised wire. The pattern wasn't random. It suggested the leak wasn't in the field or local police. It was higher, possibly inside the Bureau itself. She took her findings to her superior, Assistant Director Robert Shaw. Shaw was a 30-year veteran, a man who had helped put away the Gambino family's leadership in the 90s. He listened in his office, the lights of Washington, D.C. glittering behind him, and when she finished, he was silent for a full minute. "If what you're suggesting is true, Vance, then we cannot trust any part of our own apparatus. The case is dead." Mara leaned forward. "No, sir, it means we stop using the apparatus. We go around it." Her proposal was not original. It was a page from the Bureau's own history, from the playbook of agents like Joe Pistone, who spent 6 years as Donnie Brasco inside the Bonanno family. But where Pistone built a false identity from the ground up, Mara's plan was more dangerous, more direct. She wouldn't spend years earning trust. She would present Valenti with a prize so tempting, so vulnerable, that he would bring her directly into his inner sanctum. She would let his own paranoia and greed work for them. She would be kidnapped. The planning that followed was a descent into a moral and tactical labyrinth. A joint task force was formed, so compartmentalized that most members didn't know the others existed. Mara's handler was Frank DeLuca, a former undercover officer whose own work had left him with a permanent limp and a profound understanding of the psychological cost. "You're talking about handing control to a psychopath," DeLuca told her in their first safe house meeting. "You're giving him the keys to your cage and praying the lock on your side is stronger." Mara's cover was crafted with excruciating care. She became Elena Rossi, a freelance forensic accountant with a shady client list and a gambling debt to a mid-level bookie, a bookie secretly on the FBI's payroll. The debt would be called in by a Valenti collector. Elena would panic, offer her unique skills as payment. The collector would report up the chain. The bait was not just a vulnerable woman. It was a skilled financial mechanic who could help a ghost launder even more money. The psychological preparation was brutal. Mara underwent what the Bureau calls stress inoculation. She was subjected to simulated interrogations, blindfolded, deprived of sleep, confronted with scenarios where her extraction team was compromised and wouldn't come. Therapists warned her of the documented risks: identity erosion, hypervigilance that borders on paranoia, a craving for the adrenaline of the criminal identity. She studied the fate of DEA agent Kiki Camarena, kidnapped and tortured by a cartel in 1985. His mistake was being discovered. Her entire mission depended on it. "You will feel alone," DeLuca warned, "because you will be. The moment you're in that car, the rulebook burns. We will have eyes, but we cannot blink first." The Operation Greenlight came in February. The trap was set in a minimalist apartment in Jersey City, a place wired with so many audio and panic sensors it hummed. The debt was called. Elena Rossi made the desperate offer, and they waited. For 2 weeks, nothing. Then, on a Tuesday night, the collector returned with 2 new men. They didn't speak. They simply tossed a hood over her head, bound her wrists with zip ties, and shoved her into the back of a van. The last thing Mara heard through her hidden earpiece was Frank DeLuca's steady voice. "Asset is mobile, package is secure, God be with you." Then static. The van drove for what felt like hours. When the hood came off, she was in a concrete room lit by a single hanging bulb, and sitting across from her for the first time in 3 years of hunting him was Michael Valenti. He examined her like a curiosity. "Elena Rossi," he said, his voice quiet. "An accountant who gets kidnapped and doesn't scream." Mara, her heart a hammer against her ribs, met his gaze and shrugged, playing the part of a woman who'd seen enough to know fear was a currency she couldn't afford. "Screaming," she said, her voice remarkably steady, "never made the math work out." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes, it was the first test, and she had passed. He leaned forward, his polished shoes clicking on the concrete. "My people tell me you're very good with problems." "I have a problem. $5 million, sitting in a place it shouldn't be. Track it, clean it, and your debt disappears." It was the entry point she'd hoped for. She nodded. But as Valenti laid out the details of the frozen account, a chill seeped into her bones. The bank, the account number, the intermediary, they were details from a sealed, unrelated FBI money laundering investigation. Details only someone with direct access to the Bureau's intelligence database would know. The leak wasn't just real. It was in the room with them, whispering in the ghost's ear, and she had just volunteered to walk deeper into the dark. The frozen account was a test. Mara understood that instantly. Valenti wasn't just giving her a job, he was verifying a leak. By handing her information that only existed in a sealed FBI file, he was watching to see if she recognized it. If she flinched, she was dead. So she didn't. She swallowed the icy fear, kept her face a mask of professional focus, and said, "The routing number is wrong. That's why it's frozen. Someone gave you bad information." It was a gamble. A tiny correction that positioned her as smarter than his source. Valenti's eyes narrowed just for a fraction of a second. Then he nodded, "Fix it." And with that, she was moved from the concrete room to a guarded suite upstairs with a laptop, a secure satellite phone, and a shadow named Leo who never spoke. For the next 72 hours, Mara lived in a paradox. To maintain her cover as Elena the accountant, she had to actually launder Valenti's money. With Frank DeLuca's remote guidance, she created a dizzying chain of false invoices and shell corporations, dancing on the edge of real crime to sell a believable performance. Every transaction was a tightrope walk. She had to be competent enough to earn trust, but slow enough to buy time for the surveillance team to trace the digital footprints. And all the while, the question pulsed in her skull: who was the leak? The knowledge poisoned every interaction. Was Leo, her silent guard, reporting her every keystroke to someone inside the Bureau? Was the van that brought her here tracked by her allies or her enemies? Answer began to surface through the money itself. As she unraveled the $5 million problem, a pattern emerged. The funds weren't just mob profits, they were payouts. Regular, structured deposits from a corporation listed as Frontier Holdings. A few hours of digging through obscured ownership records revealed Frontier was a subsidiary of a defense contractor. A contractor that had received a $200 million federal grant 6 months prior, a grant overseen by a congressional committee. Valenti wasn't just running gambling and unions, he was selling influence. He had a hook in the political machinery itself. This was the real empire. The gambling was petty cash. This was what made him a ghost. You can't prosecute a man who owns pieces of the system designed to prosecute him. Mara managed to embed a data packet in an encrypted email, a burst transmission to DeLuca containing the Frontier Holdings link. The response, when it came through a prearranged signal on a seemingly innocent news website, was terse and terrifying. Source confirmed. Compartmentalize, trust no protocol. The message was clear. The leak was so high or so deeply embedded in their operational channels that the entire official playbook was compromised. She was truly on her own. The psychological weight, the identity strain documented in studies of undercover operatives, became a physical pressure. She was Mara Vance, an FBI agent holding onto her mission by her fingernails. She was Elena Rossi, a cynical accountant gaining the confidence of a killer. In the quiet moments, in the suite's lavish bathroom, she would stare at her reflection and whisper both names, trying to remember which face was the real one. Valenti's trust, once given, was transactional but absolute. He began consulting her on other logistical problems. A shipping container of electronics gone missing in Port Newark, a union representative suddenly demanding transparency. Each problem was a window into his organization. Mara catalogued everything: names, locations, operational rhythms. She stored them not on the laptop, but in her memory using a mnemonic system she'd developed years ago. The suite, she learned, was in a fortified compound in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. There were at least 15 armed men on rotation. Valenti left every Tuesday and Thursday night, returning in the early hours, to where no one said. Her break came from an unexpected source, Leo, the silent shadow. One evening, as she pretended to work, he spoke for the first time. His voice was gravelly low. "You play chess?" She looked up, startled. He was setting up a board on a side table. She nodded. They played. He was aggressive, tactical. She was patient, defensive. They didn't speak. The next night, he set up the board again. On the third night, as he checkmated her, he said, "He goes to see the tailor on those nights." Mara kept her eyes on the board. "The tailor, the man who makes the suits fit the situation," Leo said, and cleared the pieces. It was a warning. Valenti was meeting someone who helped him present a legitimate face, someone who might be the connection to that defense contractor to the political world. The tension in the compound spiked a week later. Valenti returned from a Tuesday night meeting in a black fury. He stormed past her without a word, followed by two of his captains. Voices were raised behind a soundproof door. Later, Leo was gone. When Mara asked one of the other guards where he was, the man just shook his head, his face pale. Leo had been the leak inside Valenti's house. He'd been talking to her, and now he was gone. The message was unmistakable. Trust was a currency that could be cancelled at any time. It was then that Valenti presented her with the real job. He summoned her to his private study, a room lined with leather-bound books he'd never read. On the desk was a single file. "Elena," he said, his earlier fury replaced with a chilling calm, "I have a proposal, a merger of sorts. A partner is becoming unreliable. I need a full audit. His books, his contacts, his weaknesses. I need to know the cost of making him disappear." He slid the file toward her. Inside was a photograph of a man in his 60s, smiling at a charity gala. Mara's blood ran cold. It was Assistant Director Robert Shaw, her superior, the man who had greenlit her operation, the man who had access to every sealed file in the bureau. Valenti was asking her to perform a forensic audit on the FBI's own Assistant Director. The leak wasn't just a source. It was Shaw. He was the unreliable partner. The world tilted. Shaw wasn't just leaking information. He was in business with Valenti. The federal grant, the influence peddling, Shaw was the bridge. Her mission had just inverted. She wasn't just gathering evidence on Valenti. She was now the only person inside the fortress who could gather evidence on the corrupt FBI official protecting him. The weight of it was crushing. She had to betray Shaw to Valenti convincingly, while secretly building a case against both men for her own agency, an agency currently being manipulated by one of the suspects. The layers of deception threatened to collapse in on themselves. She took the file, her hand steady only through immense force of will. "It will take time," she said. "Good things do," Valenti replied, "but not too much time. My patience, like my partnership, has its limits." As she left the study, she saw a familiar object placed on a shelf like a trophy, a single blinking pink sneaker, a child's shoe. It was so utterly out of place in that room of dark wood and menace that it stopped her heart. Valentine noticed her gaze. A reminder, he said softly, that everyone has something they wouldn't want to lose, even ghosts. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. The threat was a living thing in the room. She thought of her own family, her mother in Ohio, her brother serving overseas. They were her hidden vulnerability. Did he know about them? Was this a random piece of psychological warfare or a specific, targeted warning? That night, using a backdoor she'd built into the compound's archaic security system, she risked a 10-second burst transmission to DeLuca. Just 3 words, "The tailor is sure." The response took an agonizing 18 hours. When it came, it was not from DeLuca. It was from a number she didn't recognize, a text message that appeared on the burner phone Valentine had provided her. It read, "Your brother's unit rotates home from Kuwait next month. Safe travels." The room spun. It was signed with a single letter. The message was twofold. It confirmed DeLuca's channel was breached. The leak Shaw had intercepted her communication, and it demonstrated terrifying personal knowledge. They knew about her brother. They knew his deployment schedule. The FBI's protection of her identity had failed completely. She was exposed, and Shaw was now actively playing against her from inside the Bureau's own command structure. The chessboard had just been flipped, and she was no longer sure which side any of the pieces were on. The text message was a declaration of war. It told Mara 2 things. Shaw knew she was alive and inside, and he was willing to use her family as a lever. The rules were gone. She was in a box with 2 predators, and the only way out was to make them see each other as the bigger threat. She had 24 hours before Valentine expected a preliminary report on Shaw. She used them to build a weapon. She dove into the audit of Shaw with a ferocious focus, but not the one Valentine expected. Using the very access Valentine had given her, she constructed 2 parallel narratives. The first, for Valentine's eyes, was a damning but superficial portrait of Shaw's corruption, just enough truth to be credible. It painted Shaw as greedy, reckless, and most importantly, a liability who was skimming from their shared ventures. The second, hidden within encrypted fragments of the same files, was the real case. She traced the $200 million defense grant through a maze of shell companies, finding where Valentine's kickbacks flowed into Shaw's offshore accounts. She found records of deleted emails, meetings at private clubs, and a pattern of federal investigations that were mysteriously dropped. She was building a case that could put them both away for life, from inside the lion's den. But the child's sneaker haunted her. She managed to get a guard drunk enough to talk one night. The story was sickeningly simple. 2 years ago, a prosecutor in Philadelphia had been building a racketeering case against one of Valentine's lieutenants. The prosecutor had a 4-year-old daughter. One of her pink sneakers was delivered to the prosecutor's desk with a note. "The other one is with her. Call off the dogs." The case collapsed the next day. The prosecutor resigned. The lieutenant walked. The shoe was Valentine's favorite trophy, a symbol of his understanding that everyone, even the righteous, had a pressure point. Mara now knew hers had been identified, her brother. She had to move faster. Her opportunity came from Shaw's own arrogance. He made a mistake. He tried to contact her directly. A coded message appeared in the classifieds of a local newspaper, a prearranged emergency signal from the Bureau. It was an extraction offer, a time and a location. But the code was an old one, from a protocol Shaw knew, but Frank DeLuca had abandoned for this operation. It was a trap. Shaw wasn't trying to save her. He was trying to flush her out into the open to be silenced. Mara saw the play instantly, and she saw her move. She took the extraction offer to Valentine. She presented it not as a threat to her, but as a threat to him. "Shaw is panicking," she told him, spreading the printed classified ad on his desk. "He thinks I'm a loose end. If he pulls me out, or worse, the entire arrangement is exposed. He's not just unreliable, he's a danger to your entire operation." Valentine studied the ad, his expression unreadable. "And what do you suggest, Elena?" "Give him what he wants," she said, her voice cool. "Let him try to extract me, and when he does, we'll know who he's working with. We'll cut the head off the snake." It was a monstrous gamble. She was proposing that Valentine use her as live bait to expose Shaw's network within law enforcement. She was betting her life that Valentine's desire to control the threat was greater than his suspicion of her. Valentine agreed. The plan was set for a warehouse in the Meadowlands. Mara would go to the extraction point. Valenti's men would be hidden, waiting to identify and intercept Shaw's team. It was a potential bloodbath, a clash between the Mafia and corrupt federal agents. Mara's only hope was that in the chaos, the legitimate part of the FBI, Frank DeLuca's true team, who she prayed was monitoring everything, would have a clear shot to take everyone down. The night of the meeting was cold and foggy. Mara was driven to the warehouse, a wire hidden on her body, a transmitter that fed audio to Valenti's men in a van 2 blocks away. She walked into the vast, empty space, her footsteps echoing. She waited. At exactly midnight, headlights cut through the fog. A single sedan pulled in. The door opened, but it wasn't a strike team. It was Assistant Director Robert Shaw alone. He stepped out, his coat open, his hands visible. He looked older, worn. "Vance," he called out, using her real name. The sound of it in his voice was a shock. "It's over. Valenti's listening, isn't he? Tell him to come out. I'm here to talk." From the shadows, Valenti emerged, flanked by 4 armed men. He looked amused. "Robert, you came alone, either very brave or very stupid." Shaw didn't flinch. "I came to make a deal. You have something I need." He pointed at Mara. She's not an accountant. She's FBI. Her name is Mara Vance. She's been building a case against you for 3 years. The air left the room. Mara's heart stopped. This was Shaw's play, to trade her identity for what? Valenti slowly turned his head to look at her. His eyes were black pits. "Is that true?" Mara held his gaze, her mind racing. Denial was useless. Shaw had just burned her cover completely. Her only currency was truth. "Yes," she said, her voice clear in the silent warehouse. "My name is Special Agent Mara Vance, and he," she said, pointing at Shaw, "is your partner. He's the one who's been leaking our operations, who's been taking your money, and who is now sacrificing me to cover his own tracks. He's not here to deal. He's here to clean up a mess." Shaw laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think he doesn't know? He's known for weeks. I told him the moment I confirmed it." He turned to Valenti. "Michael, this was our arrangement. I give you intelligence, you give me a cut, and I handle internal threats. She is an internal threat to both of us. Let me take her and she disappears. The case disappears with her." The revelation hit Mara like a physical blow. Valenti had known, for weeks, the tests, the job, the sneaker. It all snapped into a new, horrifying alignment. She hadn't been auditing Shaw. She had been performing for Valenti, proving her loyalty by betraying her own boss. Valenti had been playing them against each other from the start. Valenti smiled, a slow, chilling gesture. Robert, you are so transparent. You're not handling a threat. You're eliminating a witness to your own embezzlement." He nodded to one of his men who threw a folder at Shaw's feet. It spilled open, revealing financial records. "Your little side project, skimming from our shared accounts, using my operations to fund your own retirement. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Shaw's face went white. Valenti continued, his voice conversational. "And now you bring me this gift, a federal agent. You think handing her to me solves your problem? It only gives me a bigger problem. Now I have to kill an FBI agent because of your mistakes." He looked at Mara, then back at Shaw. "But you're right about one thing, she does need to disappear." He raised his hand, his men raised their weapons, but they weren't pointed at Mara. They were pointed at Shaw. Shaw stumbled back, his hands up. "Michael, wait, we can." The gunshots were deafening in the concrete space. Shaw fell, a look of utter surprise frozen on his face. Valenti lowered his hand. The silence returned, heavier now, thick with gunsmoke. Valenti walked over to Shaw's body, nudged it with his shoe, then turned to Mara. A messy end to a messy partnership. He walked toward her. "Special Agent Vance, you have been very useful. You rooted out a cancer in my organization. For that, I thank you." He stopped an arm's length away. "But you are also a cancer. A federal agent with a tape recorder standing in a room with a dead assistant director." He reached out and plucked the wire from her collar. "Your insurance is gone." Mara stood perfectly still, the cold certainty of death washing over her. But then Valenti did something unexpected. He smiled. "However, I am a businessman, and a businessman knows when an asset is too valuable to discard. Shaw is dead. The leak is plugged. The case you were building, it was against him, wasn't it? To protect your own people from a corrupt official." He was rewriting the narrative in real time and with a terrifying logic. "You came here undercover to get Shaw. And you succeeded. With my help, we are in a way partners now." He gestured to the body. "This is your ticket out. You returned to your FBI a hero. You took down a major corrupt official. You can close your case. And in return, my operations continue, unmolested. A gesture of mutual respect between professionals." It was an offer, a devil's bargain. She could walk out alive, a hero who had taken down a bad apple, and Valenti would vanish back into the shadows, his empire intact. Or she could die here, another casualty in a war no one knew was being fought. The weight of 3 years of work, of Leo's disappearance, of the child's sneaker, of every victim of Valenti's empire pressed down on her. She looked at Shaw's body, then at Valenti's calm, expectant face. She had come to bring down a ghost. She had instead been offered a deal to become one herself. She took a slow breath, the taste of gunpowder and betrayal on her tongue, and she made her choice. Mara looked at the dead man on the floor, then at the living one offering her a life raft built on a lie. She smiled. It was a small, tired smile. "Partners," she said, the word tasting like ash. "You help me walk out of here a hero, I close the book on Shaw, and your business continues. That's the deal." Valenti nodded, a businessman closing a satisfactory negotiation. "That's the deal." He gestured to his men. "Clean this up, we're done here." He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her. "Your brother comes home next month. Give him my regards." And then he was gone, swallowed by the fog outside, leaving her alone with his men and Shaw's body. The cleanup was clinical. Shaw's body was wrapped and removed. The warehouse was scrubbed. Mara was driven back to the compound, not as a prisoner, but as a guest of sorts. She was given a new phone. The first call she made was to the number Frank DeLuca had given her, a secure line he said only he answered. It rang once. Yeah, DeLuca's voice was strained. "It's Elena," she said, using her cover name. "The tailor's shop is closed, permanently. The owner had an accident." There was a long silence on the other end. DeLuca understood. Shaw was dead. "Are you clean?" he asked. "I'm coming home," she said, and hung up. The official story was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction, crafted by what was left of the legitimate task force. Assistant Director Robert Shaw, a decorated veteran, had been discovered to be in the employ of organized crime. He had been lured to a meeting with his handlers and killed in a confrontation. Special Agent Mara Vance, working a deep-cover financial investigation, had uncovered his corruption and was instrumental in exposing him. She was extracted after a harrowing ordeal. There were medals, there was a quiet ceremony, there were therapists assigned. The $200 million grant scandal was quietly investigated, a few mid-level officials were reprimanded, and Frontier Holdings dissolved. It was a clean, closed loop. The public narrative was satisfied. The ghost remained a ghost. Mara had not accepted Valenti's deal. She had only pretended to. In the 48 hours before her official extraction, while still in the compound, she had executed the real endgame. The memory system in her mind held every name, date, and transaction. The hidden files she'd built on Shaw also contained the complete architecture of Valenti's influence peddling operation. She hadn't transmitted it earlier because Shaw would have intercepted it. Now, with Shaw gone, she had a narrow window. Using a different backdoor, one she'd never risked before, she uploaded the entire dataset, not to the FBI's main servers, but to a sealed, independent server run by the Office of the Inspector General. It was a nuclear option. It bypassed the entire bureau chain of command. The case file landed not with prosecutors, but with federal judges and a special grand jury that had been quietly impaneled months earlier as a contingency plan. Valenti had wiped the ledger clean on his end. He didn't know she had a photographic copy. 3 weeks after she walked out of the compound, the hammer fell. It was a coordinated strike across 3 states. 37 indictments were unsealed, not for murder or racketeering, but for conspiracy to defraud the United States, bribery of public officials, and wire fraud. The evidence was all financial, all documentary, all clean. It was the case Mara had wanted to build from the beginning. Valenti was arrested at his home at 5 in the morning. He was calm, compliant. He asked for his lawyer, and then he saw Mara standing with the arresting agents. She met his gaze through the window of the black SUV. He didn't look angry, he looked impressed. Then he smiled and gave her a small, mocking salute before being driven away. The trial lasted 8 months. Mara testified for 3 days. Valenti's defense was simple. He was a legitimate businessman being framed by a rogue agent with a grudge. He claimed Shaw had been her corrupt handler, and she was cleaning up her own mess. But the financial paper trail was immutable. The records of payments to Shaw's accounts, the metadata from deleted emails recovered from hidden servers, the testimony from lower-level players who flipped, it formed an inescapable web. Michael the Ghost Valenti was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 25 years in a federal supermax prison. His empire didn't crumble, it was dismantled brick by financial brick. For Mara, the victory was hollow. The psychological toll was the real sentence. The hypervigilance never left. She would wake in the night, convinced someone was in her apartment. The sound of a van idling outside would send her heart into her throat. She had nightmares of the concrete room, of Leo's empty chair, of a pink sneaker blinking in the dark. The bureau offered her a promotion, a desk job, a chance to teach at Quantico. She turned it all down. The identity strain was too great. She couldn't reconcile the woman who had laundered money and manipulated a killer with the agent who wore a suit and gave lectures. She resigned 18 months after the trial ended. The final surprising detail emerged a year later from an unexpected source. Frank DeLuca, retired and living in Florida, called her. "Thought you'd want to know," he said, his voice crackly over the line. "They found Leo." Mara's breath caught. "Alive, barely," DeLuca said. "Valenti had him stashed in a private detention facility upstate, a place he used for people he wasn't ready to kill. When the organization collapsed, the guards walked away. Leo was in there for over a year. He's in bad shape, but he's talking, and he asked for you." Mara visited him in a secure hospital. Leo was a skeleton of the man she'd played chess with, but his eyes were clear. He told her his real name was Mateo Cruz. He had been an undercover NYPD officer planted inside Valenti's crew years earlier. His cover was so deep his own department had listed him as a missing person. He had been about to make his move when Valenti suspected a leak. He'd spoken to Mara as a test to see if she was the real leak. When she passed, it confirmed his own cover was blown. Valenti had him taken. "You finished the job," Leo whispered to her, "for both of us." It was a closure she didn't know she needed. Today, Mara Vance lives under a different name in a small town where no one knows her face. She works as a consultant for nonprofits, tracking financial fraud for charities. She is good at it. The skills, it turns out, are transferable. She still has the medal in a drawer. She still sees a therapist twice a month. Her brother made it home from Kuwait safely. She never told him why. Sometimes, on the anniversary of the verdict, she receives a postcard with no return address. It's always the same, a picture of a chess piece the night. She knows who sends it. She never replies. The story of Special Agent Mara Vance is not one of triumphant victory. It is a story of a calculated, terrible risk. She walked into the darkness carrying a hidden flame, and she walked out having burned parts of herself away. She exposed a corruption so deep it reached the highest levels of her own institution. She brought down a ghost by becoming one herself. The case was closed, the convictions secured, but the cost is a line item that never appears on an official report. It's in the quiet of a safe house, in the memory of a shoe left as a warning, in the steady hands of an agent who looked at a monster and did not blink, knowing that to win, she first had to let him believe he had already won. The story of Mara Vance forces us to ask a difficult question. What is the true cost of bringing a ghost to justice? For every headline about a major takedown, there is a human ledger of sacrifice that never gets published. It's in the years of living a lie, the relationships severed for cover, the pieces of a self that can't be glued back together when the mission ends. Mara's gamble succeeded where traditional methods had failed for a decade, but her victory was measured in personal ruin and permanent vigilance. This is the unwritten contract of deep undercover work. Joe Pistone, after 6 years as Donnie Brasco, lived with a $500,000 contract on his head and had to raise his daughters under assumed names. Joaquin Garcia, who spent nearly 3 years inside the Gambino family, came closer to being made than any agent in history, a line no one should ever have to walk. Enrique "Kiki" Camarena paid the ultimate price. These aren't exceptions, they are the rule. The work demands a surrender of identity, a moral flexibility that leaves scars, and a confrontation with the darkest parts of human nature, including, sometimes, your own. The system Mara Vance fought against, and was nearly consumed by, is a mirror of a deeper vulnerability. When corruption seeps into the very institutions designed to root it out, the defender must become something else. A saboteur, a ghost hunter, a willing captive. Her story exposes the terrifying reality that sometimes, to protect the light, you must operate in a darkness so complete you risk forgetting what light looks like. So where does that leave us? With a profound respect for the shadows where these battles are fought, and for the people who choose to fight them. It leaves us understanding that justice is not a switch that gets flipped, but a slow, grinding, often ugly process of outthinking, outlasting, and outmaneuvering evil on its own terms. It is work done by individuals who accept that they may not be there to see the final verdict, that their name may never be known, and that their greatest success might be a life lived quietly afterward, forever glancing over a shoulder. The ghost was caught, the corrupt official was removed, the ledger was balanced, but the woman who did it walks through the world a different person, a living archive of secrets and strategies, a monument to the price of making the invisible visible. Her story is a testament to the fact that the most dangerous traps are not the ones we walk into, but the ones we build ourselves, trusting that we alone know how to spring them. If you found this deep dive into the hidden world of undercover operations compelling, there are more stories like it waiting for you. The history of law enforcement is written in these shadows. Subscribe now and join us as we pull back the curtain on the next untold story of risk, redemption, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Thanks for watching.